From Khabib Nurmagomedov leaving the UFC to spend time with his family to Anthony Johnson, who is unable to move on from his devastating loss at UFC 210. Here are the most heartbreaking retirements in UFC history, starting with one of the best fighters of all time, Khabib Nurmagomedov. Back in 2021, the MMA legend broke all our hearts by announcing that he was leaving the sport for good.
It's gonna be my last fight, and if I give my word, I have to follow this.
He had already stopped fighting by then and had moved on to coaching. So while it wasn't much of a surprise, it did leave the sports world devastated. The former UFC lightweight king decided to quit his job as a coach so he could spend more time with his family. When the Paps reached out to his trainer and teacher, Javier Mendez, he gave us insight into why the legend wanted to retire. He just didn't want to miss out on being a father. Isn't that adorable? He has 3 children, 2 sons and 1 daughter, and he wants to spend more time with them because he loves them so much. While it's understandable, it was still pretty sad. Nurmagomedov was one of the best at what he did when he quit. At UFC 254, he beat Justin Gaethje by a triangle choke, making his record 29-0. For the 3rd time in a row, he was able to keep his lightweight crown. Mendez thought that his former student was one of the best fighters in the UFC for his weight class, and was an amazing coach as well. Islam Makhachev was the most well-known star who worked under Khabib. He won the lightweight title after beating Charles Oliveira by submission at UFC 280. Plus, the legend retired with a perfect record.
I always ask God, but He gives me always more than what I ask.
So you can imagine why fans were sad. The same can be said about Daniel Cormier. After he lost to Stipe Miocic at UFC 252 by a majority decision, he decided to leave the fighting behind. Cormier didn't want to fight for any other belts.
You don't make decisions based on emotions, but it's a tough pill to swallow.
Because he just didn't believe he had a title in his future. Sad, right? His 3rd fight against Miocic broke his spirit. Cormier had already won the heavyweight title before, beating Miocic and Derek Lewis. But Miocic then won 2 fights in a row against him. Cormier told ESPN's Ariel Helwani that nothing in the world could make him fight again after this. He officially left the sport in August 2020. It goes without saying that even though he lost against Miocic, he went out as one of the best MMA fighters of all time. During his MMA career, DC won titles in both the light heavyweight and heavyweight weight classes. He retired with a record of 22 wins and 3 losses, including a no contest against John Jones. His fights with Miocic, Jones, and Silva are some of the most famous in the history of the sport, so fans were devastated. But hey, at least we got him as a commentator. This next former fighter left us all in tears too. It's none other than Michael Bisping. The fighter officially announced his retirement on May 28th, 2018.
You gotta give it up for George, guys. You know, congratulations. He was the Batman tonight. New York, you know, I can't.
Breaking the hearts of fans everywhere. On his podcast, he said that the choice was made because of issues with his eye. The Count had surgery for a damaged retina in 2013 after Vitor Belfort hit him in the eye. He still carried on though, but he got a wake-up call after the fight with Kelvin Gastelum. That was when his good eye started hurting, and he realized that he needed to take care of his health. He went into more detail by saying that it's just not worth it. He couldn't think of anything else to do but retire. But hey, he already owned the championship, so he'd met all of his goals. The Count told fans that it's important to know when to give up. Since he was getting close to 40, he thought this was a good time to retire. The British fighter retired from competitive mixed martial arts with a record of 39, including 29 in the UFC. His best fight was at UFC 199 in 2016, when he made Luke Rockhold submit to win the UFC middleweight title, before losing the title twice in a row to Georges St. Pierre and Kelvin Gastelum. He successfully held it against Dan Henderson. The legendary fighter decided to go out on a high note with his head held high. Sad but inspiring, right? But no one is as inspiring as Anthony Johnson. He was a fearsome knockout artist and shocked the MMA world when he quit the sport, right after his crushing loss to UFC light heavyweight champion Daniel Cormier at UFC 210.
This is something I have to do for me. I love you all.
he decided to quit after losing to the better man, claiming that there was no other way to go about it. Rumble had the best time at the UFC, but he was done. Nice and simple. He said that he couldn't think of a better place to retire than Buffalo, New York with his family. The news really caught everyone by surprise. I mean, Rumble was still seen as a top contender at 205 pounds and a top finisher in the sport, even after the loss. Johnson didn't say much about what he wanted to do in the future, except that he wouldn't leave the UFC for another promotion. Also, since the UFC stopped him from participating in other combat sports, he eventually quit all of them. Even though Johnson has retired, the light heavyweight class has a big rumble-shaped hole that no one else could ever fill. I can't go on in good conscience without mentioning Nate Diaz, though. 2022 was indeed a sad year for the sport because the longtime fighter had been cut from the UFC roster. Diaz's last fight in the UFC was against Tony Ferguson at UFC 279. His lawyer, Zach Rosenfield, said that the UFC no longer has the right to negotiate with Diaz alone. The Stockton native decided to become a free agent. After beating Ferguson by a chokehold in the fourth round of UFC 279, Diaz left the UFC on a high note. In recent years, the iconic fighter has been in a number of high-profile fights. He fought Conor McGregor 3 times and Jorge Masvidal once for the legendary BMF title. He'd been a member of the UFC since 2007. Plus, he told ESPN that he would love to fight in the UFC someday. But in the meantime, he wanted to try other things, like boxing. Diablo has also recently started his own marketing company, Real Fight Inc., which he'll use to promote fights in the future. I'll end the video with another heartbreaking retirement, and it's BJ Penn, of course. Back in 2014, the legend quit the UFC after losing to Frankie Edgar by TKO. Even though he was welcomed into the UFC Hall of Fame in 2015 and said he was retiring from mixed martial arts in 2014, he ended up fighting 4 more times. Hey, these are fighting sports, and the R word doesn't sit well with fighters, especially those who are at the top of their sports. He finished his career with a 16-10-2 record. His final record wasn't very good, though, since he lost 5 of his last 7 fights and tied 1. The Prodigy's first fight was at UFC 31, which was more than 13 years ago. In that time, he's won the UFC titles for both welterweight and lightweight. He's also won many awards, and Sports Illustrated named him the 10th best MMA fighter of the 2000s. Due to his amazing presence and dedication, Penn had a level of respect that's rarely seen in the sport. There are many reasons for this, but you can be sure that his can-do attitude was at the top of the list. He spent his whole life looking for the hardest problems to solve. I mean, we know he always picked fights with the biggest, meanest people in the room. Throughout his career, the fighter competed in many different weight classes, with the last one being featherweight. Edgar won easily in the end, but that shouldn't take away from how great Penn was when he was at his best. Penn was an early leader in the lighter weight divisions of the sport, and his influence over the past 13 years has been huge. He did everything he set out to do, so he thought it was time for him to hang up his fighting gloves for good. On that note, that's all I have on the most heartbreaking retirements in UFC history.